Topped with coconut, chocolate feathering or passion fruit coulis, this is an absolutely delicious slice that I think I have finally perfected. Custard square, vanilla slice, mille-feuille, or dare I say it, snot block, as our Aussie friends across the ditch call it, is something that tastes delicious but can be tricky to master. If you've never come across this slice before, it's 2 layers of delicate pastry sandwiched together with a delicious creamy vanilla infused custard. Putting on the toppings and cutting and plating it is the fun part. But let's not put the cart before the horse. We need to start at the beginning. Today I'm going to share what I've learnt and what I've figured out through trial and error about how to get this right. Well, this isn't going to make itself, so let's get on with it. The first thing we need to do is bake our pastry. I've been lazy and am just using the store-bought ready-rolled flaky puff pastry. But by all means, if you're feeling time-rich, you can make your own. It's a lot of fun and very rewarding to get right. We want to split the sheet in half, one piece for the bottom and one for the top. Then dock it all over with a fork. This is to allow some of the air to escape when it's in the oven, because we don't want the pastry to puff to its full potential and be full of air. Bake it in a hot oven until it's evenly and lightly browned. When it comes out of the oven, I like to give it a squash down to flatten it some more, and then leave it on a wire rack to cool. Next we need to make the custard. The trouble with custard is that it's really easy to overcook, and it can be tricky to get it completely smooth. And who wants lumpy custard? As a child, I hated custard, and I think it's because it was often lumpy. Maybe it was because custard very quickly forms a skin when it cools. If you stir this back through, it'll create lumps, so work quickly when dealing with custard. This is how I make it. It's not conventional, but it's foolproof. I whisk the flour, corn flour, custard powder, sugar, a pinch of salt, and the water together to create a smooth slurry. It's vital that you get all the lumps out in this stage of the process by whisking it until it's completely smooth. Then whisk in the milk. It hardly looks like this is doing much, but you will be able to feel the solid mass at the bottom, and you need to whisk this through. Then scrape in the vanilla bean, or you could use vanilla essence as an alternative. I like using the fresh vanilla bean pod for this, as it leaves the little black specks which are visible when it's cut and plated. By the way, I'll leave the recipe in the description below. Lastly, I'll add the butter, and then we're ready to microwave it. Yes, microwave it! I did say this method wasn't conventional, but it seems to be a foolproof way of getting consistently good results. Stop it very often and give it a good whisk, like every minute or so to start with, and then every 30 seconds as it starts thickening up. You'll notice how it starts cooking from the outside of the bowl, so it's important you mix this through before it overcooks and you end up with lumpy custard. All microwaves are different, but I've made this in lots of different microwaves, and the only thing that varies is how long you cook it for. Once it's thickened up a little, add the egg yolk. Make sure you whisk it while you're adding it so that it disperses evenly through the custard. Then we give it one more whirl in the microwave to cook the yolk and thicken it up a little more. If it's too runny, it'll just run straight out of the custard square, so keep cooking it until it holds a soft peak. It's now ready to use, so we have no time to lose. Don't forget, custard will very quickly begin to form a skin on top, so work quickly. Pour some of the custard onto each piece of pastry and smooth it to the edges. You'll notice I'm putting it onto the puffed up top side of the pastry. It looks better to put the icing on the flatter underside, and it's easier to move the pieces when the base is flat rather than flaking everywhere. Some people will trim their pastry to fit perfectly into a deep tin before filling it, and potentially you'd be able to make your custard square higher that way. but I just do it freehand. Then put the one piece onto the other. There's no best way to do this. Just commit to it and go for it. I prefer to make this a day ahead of serving it. The flavours develop and it really is much nicer the next day. So I'm going to put this into the fridge and come back tomorrow. Now it's completely set, we can add the icing and toppings. Once again, there are a few different ways you can make this. I usually make it with icing sugar and boiling water. Add a little boiling water to your icing sugar and mix it until a smooth icing forms. Be really careful how much boiling water you add. You can always add more, but you can't take it away. If you do end up adding too much, just add a little more icing sugar. This is what it should look like when it's done. Not too runny and not so thick that it's not able to be spread. I'm going to make a little chocolate icing for our feathering. We'll make it the same way as before, but with some added cocoa powder. I'll put it into a piping bag, ready to use. This makes the feathering so much easier. If you don't know how to make a paper piping bag, I'll leave a link in the description below to a video that'll show you how. Pour the white icing onto the custard square and push it out to the edges using a palette knife. I'm being really careful not to let my palette knife touch the pastry and scrape it up into the icing. This is why I use the underside of the pastry as the top. There are less of the flaky bits that can be scraped up. Keep the palette knife touching only the icing and it'll work beautifully. I mentioned at the start of the video that I'm going to put 3 different toppings onto this. You wouldn't normally do this on one slice, but I want to give you some different ideas. And I don't need to eat 3 slabs of this when the video's finished. On this third, I'm going to sprinkle on some coconut before the icing sets. Sometimes you even see it finished with lightly toasted coconut. It's quite a traditional topping here in New Zealand. On this third, I'm going to do the chocolate feathering by piping on some stripes of our chocolate icing. Then we can drag a toothpick through the stripes to create a feathered pattern. Dragging it through one way and coming back the other way adds a nice effect too. Wipe the toothpick between each line to get a really clean start to the next line. This looks great, doesn't it? And it wasn't hard to achieve. On the last third, I'll pour on some passion fruit coulis. This isn't so traditional, but you often see it on custard square. I personally think it's because it's a delicious flavour combination, especially if you can get your hands on some fresh pulp. I love the yellow colour of the passion fruit and the black seeds too. Before we get into cutting and plating it, I'd like to introduce myself in case you're new here. I'm Taryn, helping you make your cooking enjoyable, taste delicious and look amazing is what this channel is all about. I love playing with food and learning and sharing what I've learnt with you. There are always new skills to learn, new ingredients to try and new ways to plate and present your food to make it look amazing. If this sounds like something you're into, make sure you subscribe, and if you're not too shy, why not introduce yourself in the comments section below. I prefer to cut this using a serrated bread knife and saw through it. It gives a much cleaner, crisp finish. It's also essential to wipe the knife between cuts, otherwise you'll get the gooey leftover bits from the previous cut dispersed over the top of the next slice. Not quite the look we're going for. This is cutting edge stuff. What a terrible pun, sorry. You can really cut this however you like. I tend to prefer just doing squares or rectangles. It's custard square after all. I'm going to present these coconut topped squares on a chopping board. The best advice I can give in terms of looks is to try and keep the pieces the same size. And I'll even sprinkle some crumbs around for a rustic look. I'm sure a board of these will disappear in a flash when you turn your back. Custard square is often purchased from a bakery and served in a paper bag, but it can make a great dessert. Simply swirl some chocolate sauce or coulis on a plate. Add a piece of custard square, a fresh fruit garnish, and a mint tip, and you'll have an amazing dessert to offer. Another option is to serve it on a platter for guests to help themselves. Try to keep the pieces in the same order as they've been cut, so they flow on from each other. And notice how the equal sizes of the pieces adds to the presentation aspect as well. Here I go on about green again, but adding a mint tip just finishes this plate off nicely. Look how it stands out against the dark plate. If it doesn't all get eaten, which I highly doubt, it will keep a few days in the fridge. But watch out for those offcuts though. Hide them from your family because those bits are so tasty. They'll all be gone in a flash, down to the last crumb. Plating desserts is a really fun part of cooking. If you want to see how you can make and use coulis to enhance your dessert plating game, here's a video with some more simple ideas. See you over there. Happy custard squaring!